Hey everybody, today is Wednesday, July 31st, 2024. My name is Terry Lynn. I am a recovered Al-Anon and I'll be leading this meeting. We want to welcome everyone to our Al-Anon Big Book Recovery meeting. This is a step speaker meeting that meets every Wednesday night at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. We will study the 12 steps by using the precise instructions out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous as they relate to us as Al-Anons. Let's get our meeting started. This is the original AA preamble written by the AA Grapevine describing the fellowship in 1940. We study the preamble with an open mind and an open heart to consider how it applies to Al-Anon. This helps us stay focused on the message of recovery the pioneers intended while observing the traditions in action. Through the actions taken based on the instructions of the basic text, we comprehend what the pioneers meant when they described the membership of AA, which is that they worked a program of recovery and they no longer drank. In our case, we no longer obsessed over the alcoholic. Through continuous action and study of these principles, the understanding of the value of the original preamble reveals itself. We ask for your humble consideration of our sincere admiration of the pioneers of Alcoholics Anonymous. The simple hope is that we of Alcoholics Anonymous will grow into the same clarity and unity that birthed the original 12-step fellowship, because without them, after all, none of us would be here. So this is the original AA preamble. We are gathered here because we are faced with the fact that we are powerless over alcohol and unable to do anything about it without the help of a power greater than ourselves. We feel that each person's religious views, if any, are his own affair. The simple purpose of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is to show what may be done to enlist the aid of a power greater than ourselves, regardless of what our individual conception of that power may be. In order to form a habit of depending upon and referring all we do to that power, we must at first apply ourselves with some diligence. By often repeating these acts, they become habitual, and the help rendered becomes natural to us. We have come to know that as alcoholics, we suffer from a serious disease for which medicine has no cure. Our condition may be the result of an allergy, which makes us different from other people. It has never been permanently cured by any treatment with which we are familiar. The only relief we have to offer is absolute abstinence, the second meaning of AA. There are no dues or fees. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Each member squares his debt by helping others to recover. An Alcoholics Anonymous member is an alcoholic who, through the application of and adherence to the AA program, has forsworn the use of any and all alcoholic beverages in any form. The moment he takes so much as one drop of beer, wine, spirits, or any other liquid containing alcohol, he automatically loses all status as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is not interested in sobering up drunks who are not sincere in their desire to stay sober for all time. Not being reformers, we offer our experience only to those who want it. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and on which we can join in harmonious action. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our program. Those who do not recover are people who will not or simply cannot give themselves to this simple program. Now, you may like our program or you may not, but the simple fact remains that it works, and we believe is our only chance to recover. There is a vast amount of fun included in the AA fellowship. Some people might be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath there lies a deadly earnestness and a full realization that we must put first things first. And with each of us, the first thing is the solution to our alcoholic problem. To drink is to die. Faith must work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. In order to set the tone for this meeting, I ask that we bow our heads in a few moments of silent prayer and meditation, followed by the Serenity Prayer. We'll take that moment now. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. I wish to remind you that whatever is said in this meeting expresses our own individual as of today and as of up to this moment. We do not speak for AA as a whole, and you are free to agree or disagree as you see fit. In fact, it is suggested that you pay no attention to anything which might not be reconciled with what is in the AA Big Book. If you don't have a big book, it's time you bought one. Read it, study it, live with it. Follow the directions in it, and learn what it means to be an AA. And that is the end of the preamble. A sponsor is anyone who has had a psychic change as a result of working the steps and has the willingness to work with others. For those looking for a sponsor to guide them through the steps, please stay tuned. Please stay tuned and have your pens ready to record phone numbers immediately after the meeting. Each Al-Anon group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying the message to the Al-Anon who still suffers. This is our primary spiritual aim. Our job as a group is to provide people with a place to learn about and work the steps. It has been our experience that working the steps consistently provides us with a better, saner life. We consider all else to be an outside issue. This includes personal problems. The proper venue for sharing such problems is with a sponsor. This is, after all, where real recovery takes place, in working the steps with a sponsor. We are just so glad we're all here, and we're all here because we're not all there. There will be a period of fellowship after the meeting. If you have questions, if you need a sponsor, if you need to check in or get current, or if you want to discuss other literature, please stick around for the fellowship. That would be a better time for these subjects. All right. So, this month of July, each week here in July, I've been doing a Step Speaker Series, and there are 5 weeks in July. So I finished up with Steps 10, 11, and 12 last week. So this week, I get to do anything I want. And I decided to share my Al-Anon story, what I used to be like before I came to Al-Anon, what brought me to Al-Anon, and what I'm like now. So I'm going to share my story called A Qualification. It gives me instructions on how to share my story in the big book that I've been talking a lot about. So I'm going to carry on with that, and wow, I've got a very luxurious amount of time to do that in, so I will try to fill up all that great time. So, yeah, my name is Terry Lynn. Let me see. So I'm going to start at the beginning. As a little kid, I was born into a family where my parents were not drinkers, but each of their fathers were. And they were affected by their father's alcoholism. It showed up in, like they call the Al-Anon disease a family disease, and it gets passed on through generations. And the way it showed up in my parents was my dad had quite an anger problem. You know, I used to think of him as a rageaholic because you never knew when he was going to get mad about something. And once he did get mad, he had a really hard time controlling his anger. And that used to scare the hell out of me as a little kid. And the way it showed up in my mom is was kind of the passive aggressive kind of martyr stuff. And as a little girl, I hated those qualities in both my parents. And I told myself I was never going to be that way. I suppose every kid does that, you know. And later on, when I was able to get a little bit honest with myself, I found out that I had, you know, large portions of both my parents in me, you know. So anyways, that's what was going on with my parents. What was going on with me is that I just, you know, as long as I can remember, I can't remember ever a time, even as a little girl, when I was comfortable. I always felt awkward and anxious and resentful and self-pitying. That was just kind of a normal state of affairs for me. Obviously, not a happy camper, you know, a person that feels that way. I had one sibling, and I was the firstborn, and he came along 2 years and 8 months. He's 2 years and 8 months younger than I am. And he really did take a lot of my mom's attention because he was kind of a sickly kid and I wasn't. My mom considered me to be a very self-sufficient person, even as a little kid, whereas I, you know, thought of myself as anything but. So I felt kind of like cast out, and I was on my own. And I honestly don't know if I was born with this self-consciousness thing. Like when later on I did the steps, I found out that selfishness is my real problem, my spiritual problem. And I don't know if I was born with that or if the circumstances into which I was born created it. I have no idea. And it honestly doesn't, you know, it really doesn't matter. But it is what it is. That's what things were like. When I went to school, things got even more awkward. I felt more awkward and more apart from other people. Like I just could not figure out how, you know, how kids, they just walk up to each other on the playground and say, will you play with me, kind of thing. And they walk off and they play together. Well, I couldn't do that in a million years. And people didn't walk up to me and do that either because I was walking around like a thundercloud, you know, because I was always consumed with resentment and self-pity and anxiety, right? So, you know, I wasn't a terrible person, but I was not a happy little girl, right? The thing I tried to make myself feel better that I used for comfort was eating. That's what I did to try to feel better, and it actually worked to help me feel better. I didn't like that about myself, that I overate, but I'm glad I had something that made me feel better back then because I needed something to make me feel better. So eventually the eating thing became, you know, a problem unto itself, of course. And that's what brought me to program in the first place. But back then, like I said, it did give me some comfort. So I was grateful for that. In the summer times, my mom she would go to what was called summer school to get her teaching degree. And I would go to my grandparents' house. My brother didn't go there because my grandfather, he liked his granddaughters and he didn't like his grandsons for whatever reason. So he wasn't all that kind to my brother. So my mom didn't bring my brother, like drop both of us at my grandparents for the summer for 3 weeks or so. But she did bring me. And wow, what a blessing that was, because I was my grandfather's favorite grandchild. And that was the place as a kid where, and with my grandmother as well, where I just couldn't do anything wrong. You know, like I was just fine the way I was as far as they were concerned. And that is a bright spot in my childhood, that I had that in the summers. I noticed during family gatherings, like at Christmas and Easter and that kind of thing, when the family, like we always went to Grandma and Papa's house, and my mom and she has two brothers, so their families, we would all be there, and it would be a full house. Like there would be a lot of people there. And people always tiptoed around Papa, and I couldn't figure out why, because to me, he was wonderful, you know, like, and I, you know, like, as a little girl, it seemed to me like people didn't like my Papa. And it kind of made me mad, because I didn't understand, and what I didn't know was that he was an alcoholic. And, you know, he had caused a lot of problems when my mom and her siblings were younger, and they had a lot of resentment about that. And really, you know, as a little girl, I didn't know this because I was, you know, his favorite kind of thing, but he was, you know, to say gruff is a serious understatement when it comes to my grandfather. So people did tiptoe around him, and they were resentful around him. And yeah, I didn't understand until way long, like until my 30s, I didn't understand that my grandfather was an alcoholic. So, and it's funny, sometimes when people have that dynamic going on in the household, one of the parents is, like my grandfather was demonized, and my grandmother was up for sainthood, and she still is. Like she's gone now. Both of them were gone in the mid-90s. But still, to this day, Grandma is just held in incredibly high esteem by everyone, and she deserves it. Like, she was wonderful. Like, oh my God, love my Grandma. And Papa is, you know, people talk down about him, and that gives me some sorrow. And but it is what it is. And you know, I feel very grateful that I have the big book that has educated me about alcoholism, so that I know that he wasn't a bad person or whatever. He was a sick person. He had a disease. The rest of my family doesn't understand that. Or, you know, if it comes up, they think it's an excuse, or they just don't believe it. You know, they do. So anyways, it is what it is. But the point of all of this is that I was incredibly lucky to have that reprieve as a kid. Anyways, heading on through school, having a terrible time with the friends thing. Finally, in high school, a boy started paying some attention to me. Oh my God. So, like, all I ever wanted was to be normal. You know, like I always felt abnormal, because it just seemed to me like other people knew how to make connections with other people, right? And I didn't. But here I was with a boy paying attention to me, just like, you know, with the other girls at school. So I just jumped all over this guy, like, you know, like, and that was a pattern in my intimate relationships. They always moved too fast, and I was always the one moving too fast. I don't know, because for whatever reason, I just thought it was going to make me seem like part of the crowd, and it was always for selfish reasons. I always wanted to enter a relationship so that I wouldn't be alone, self-serving. So that, you know, when it got to the sex stuff later on, so that I could have that selfish reason. Later on, so that I could have a second income in the household, another selfish reason. Like, I never went into relationships with the idea, what can I contribute to this person? You know, how can I enrich this person's life? That was never in my mind, you know. Needless to say, my intimate relationships did not go well, right? um, so yeah, that's just how things went with this guy in high school, because I pressured him to go too fast. I got pregnant, and this was not his fault. He was a good Catholic boy, and he did not want to do this. But I thought it would, to me it seemed like I must be and I'm obviously being very frank, and I always am when I qualify. Like, I always think, why tell my story if I'm going to skirt the truth? So I'm just going to tell my story. To me it seemed like I was the only virgin left in the school. So in order to be normal, I didn't want to be that anymore, and bam, I got pregnant. So I had a baby when I was 17, and he is my wonderful James, and he's how old is he? Born in 1979. So he's my simple math skills are not doing very well these days, but he's 43 or something like that now. And I wouldn't change a thing, but obviously back then, wow, that was very troublesome. I missed my grade 12 year. I had to drop out for a year, and then I went back the next year to finish grade 12. And of course I had to take grade 12 with the next class down. And if I had been maladjusted as far as having friends before, imagine what it was like now, being, you know, among kids that were in the class down, the younger kids, right? It was not fun. And my parents were actually, both of them were principals. So being the principal's daughter that got pregnant was, you know, it was troublesome. So, in Al-Anon, that kind of stuff is called forcing solutions. I was trying to force solutions, this trying to be normal, this trying to get what I wanted, this pressuring other people to do what I wanted them to do. And obviously it affected other people. I mean, in this particular situation, it affected that guy. It affected his parents. It affected my parents, my brother. It affected my wonderful James. You know, it affected me. It affected all kinds of people, right? So that's what self-propulsion is, what they call it in the big book. Selfishness, running on self-will does. You know, oftentimes things don't turn out all that well sometimes. So anyways, carrying on from there, various relationships after that, again, just diving into them. I mean, seriously, like a guy would look at me and smile, and I'd be planning the wedding. You know, like it was crazy. Like just had no sense of proportion about that kind of thing at all. So, you know, I got into some pretty crazy relationships. I finally got into one with a guy that was an alcoholic, and I could see he drank, but I didn't know much about that stuff at the time. And, I turned into a lunatic with this guy. I wanted to be with him all the time. Like we weren't living together or anything. I wanted to. He invited me over to his place, and again, being crazy the way I was, here I am just visiting with this guy, maybe the third time I had ever been over at his place, and I'm looking around his house thinking about, okay, well, when I move in here, I'm going to change the drapes, and I'm going to do this and that. Like it's just insane. Anyways, whenever we weren't together, I wanted to be together. Like I wanted to just smother this guy and always be with him. I didn't want him to have his own life. And when he wasn't with me, I would drive around and look for him. And I lived in a little town, and so I would drive around and look for him, and the first place I would drive to would be the bar. And I would drive past to see if his truck was there. And if his truck was there, then I would wait for a little while, and then I'd drive by again to see if it was still there. And then later I'd drive by again to see if it was still there. Like just completely crazy. Or I would be at home and I would call him on the phone, and when I knew he wasn't there, I knew he was at the bar, just to hear his voice on voicemail. And then I'd call him again just to hear his voice, like just completely crazy, right? So this is what an abnormal Al-Anon mind does. Maybe I have a worse Al-Anon mind than some people. I don't know. But eventually, I had my James and I had another son, Mark, at this point. And this guy was unkind to one of my sons, and that was it. That broke the spell for me, because I never tolerated that, from any of these guys. So that was it for this guy. It was a done deal. I was gone from him, and it's actually a really good thing because it would have been a bad scene. Anyways, carrying on, I eventually met my husband, again, did the exact same thing, pressured him. I was working as a waitress, and his sister was my supervisor, and he was just visiting from out of town. He was actually driving. I live in Canada, and he was driving through Canada, and he was visiting there at his sister's house before he carried on to BC, where he had another sibling. And she said, "Do you want to meet my brother?" And I said, "Well, which one is he?" Because I wanted to know if he was cute or not. And so she pointed him out, and I said, "Oh yeah, I want to meet him." So I met him, and, again, same deal. He was planning to leave town again to carry on to BC to stay at his brother's place and visit with his brother for a while, but when it got toward the end of the week, I asked him not to leave because I wanted him to be with me. And he stayed. We moved in together within 2 months. And at that point, I owned my own house, which is a miracle because I was raising 2 kids. I was a legal secretary. I had saved enough money to get this house on my own. And I felt so proud of myself that I had done that. And I was doing really well without a man around. I was kind of almost sane when I didn't have a man around. And now I have this guy, and I invited him to move into my house. And within a couple of months after that, I realized he was an alcoholic. A year prior to this, I had gone to another 12-step program that had to do with my compulsive eating problem. So I knew about the 12 steps, and I had heard a little bit about AA and about Al-Anon. And as soon as I realized that my husband was an alcoholic, I thought, oh, well, all I have to do is go to Al-Anon, and then I know what's going to happen. Then he'll go to AA, and he'll get sober, and we will live happily ever after. All will be well. So I went to Al-Anon, and I did not get a sponsor. I did not work the steps. I just really dove into the literature. I love the Al-Anon literature. I went to all kinds of meetings. I lived in a really small town, so there was only one meeting there, but there was another small town about 35 minutes away, and I used to go to that meeting as well. So I went to 2 meetings a week faithfully, and I learned lots, and I got really wise. I really knew how to talk the talk. Meanwhile, things at home did not go the way I expected. My husband did not go to AA, and, things carried on at home the way they had been. Money was a serious problem because a lot of it was being spent on liquor and on pot, and I had a really hard time with that, and I reacted in various ways to that. Sarcasm was one of my big weapons, and I was really good at it. Sarcasm is, I can't remember if it's derived from Latin, but it's tearing flesh is what the actual word means, the root word called tearing flesh. So when I would use the words I used and the way I used to talk to my now ex-husband, I meant to hurt him. Like, that's why I was talking to him the way I was. And I was doing it out of anger, of course. Meanwhile, thinking that I wasn't like my mom and I wasn't like my dad, right, with the anger problem and the martyr problem. So anyways, that was one of my weapons. Another weapon was, and I don't know if it's a weapon, but another way I presented in this relationship was serious depression. Like, I would just check out. I would go to the bedroom and I would just be gone. I wouldn't cook. We had 2 little kids together, and I would have a really hard time looking after the kids. He would have to look after the kids. So I really wasn't present for the kids, and that mental illness stuff really dogged me after that. And I got to blame all of that on him. It was all his fault, right? None of that would have happened if it wasn't for him. And I'm saying that tongue in cheek because I really do believe that a big part of that was, I weaponized that thing because it was all about, poor me, look at what you've done to me, right? So things did not go very well. Meanwhile, the eating thing, my eating was going insane. Like, it was just going nuts. And I had been going to the other 12-step program in that little town, but the meeting I had been going to had folded. So I was on my own with this eating problem, and it's not uncommon for Al-Anons to have, not just their Al-Anonism, but also other compulsions. And that was mine. Well, kind of along with a little bit of compulsive spending and a little bit of hoarding and a little bit of, but the compulsive eating was the big deal, the really big deal. So, it was a serious problem. I had no idea that, I thought it was the main problem, my eating. I had no idea that the Al-Anonism, meaning the way I relate to other people was my primary problem, and that it was because of that primary problem being the spiritual illness of selfishness that was creating all these other problems, right? So anyways, we had really hard times together. The way his alcoholic disease presented, besides the symptoms of, the actual drinking, was, like, I actually was really attracted to him because I thought he was a happy-go-lucky person. And in all these relationships I went into with guys, I was always looking for people that were not like my dad in the anger stuff. I was always looking for people that didn't have an anger problem. And it turned out that my husband had an even worse anger problem than my dad. And wow. If I had been scared of my dad, now I was super scared of my husband. He didn't beat me up or anything. He did push me one time so that pushed me up against the cupboards, and I immediately called the police, and he never did it again, but his anger got worse after that because he knew I would call the cops again, and they didn't charge him the first time, but they told him they would charge him if he did it again. So they had that on record, and that was a real sore spot for us. Not that I regret calling the police. Anyways, I could see that my marriage was going down the tubes, and my family, my parents, my brother and his wife, my eldest son, they had all moved to here where I live now in Alberta. And I decided that I needed to try to work on my husband to try to get him to move here too, because I knew at some point in the future I was going to need the support of family, because I knew that relationship was going to break up, right? Meanwhile, I was doing my best to educate him about the error of his ways, right? About trying to show him that this drinking thing, this is the problem, and this is what you need to fix it. I got to tell you a funny story. I had the impression that what he used to do when he didn't like something I was saying is, well, he would yell at me for a while, and then he would storm out of the house, and he would be gone a long time. And then he would come back, and I'd be too scared to say anything for a while, and whatever it was that I had been trying to tell him before would blow over, and I wouldn't say anything, right? But I was convinced that if I could just get him to stand still and listen, that, to educate him, right? If I could get him to stand still and listen and not storm out, if he could just hear me out, then he could see what he was doing wrong, and he would stop. He would go to AA, he would stop drinking, he would stop spending all the money, if only he would listen. So one day, like many married couples that have an alcoholism problem in the household, we had sex problems, right? Like he wanted way more than, he wanted lots, I wanted none, kind of thing. It was another sore spot in the house. So one day I cooked up this scheme in my mind that I could get him to listen to me if I could get him to just maybe, I tried to trick him into staying still. So this is so silly, but it's funny. So I said, I was cooking up this idea in my mind that I would ask him if he wanted to try a little bondage, and this was way outside either of our comfort zones, but I thought I was going to do this And if he went like, yeah, that sounds cool, which he never would have because he's really straight, but if he had said, yeah, my plan was to like duct tape him to a chair or something, and then he would be at my mercy, and I could he wouldn't be able to storm out. I could tell him all the stuff he was doing wrong and exactly what he needed to do to fix them, and then we'd be okay, because then he would know all the answers, and, we'd be good. He would just do the right thing. Anyways, obviously that's ridiculous. Thank God I realized how ridiculous it was before I pulled the trigger on that ridiculous scheme. Anyways, it took me 2 years to talk him into moving where we live now, where I was around family. And another 2 years after that, I did finally separate from him. I had been going to Al-Anon on and off throughout all this time. My attitude in Al-Anon was not one of humility. It was always one of, I have a lot of knowledge, like because I read everything, right? And I went to a lot of meetings. So again, I liked to do a lot of talking the talk. Because I didn't get humble, I wasn't teachable. I couldn't get better with that attitude. The mental illness stuff was continuing. It got worse after I left him, actually. And I had the 2 kids now, and things were not good for them. They were, I'm not sure how old they were now, but they were like 12 and 13 now, and they made a lot of their own suppers and that kind of thing, because I was either just eating and watching TV or I was sleeping in my bedroom, one or the other. Like it was bad times for a few years. Finally down the road, my dad just all of a sudden in a ridiculous accident that should have never happened, unfortunately. He fell and he ruptured his liver and he died. Bam. Like in 3 days. And it was such a shock. And my mom said to me, Terry, will you come and live with me because I don't want to be alone? And I honestly I think that was a decoy kind of question. I think she wanted me to come and live with her so she could look after me kind of thing rather than the other way around. Anyways, without even giving it a second thought, I'm like, again, thinking, I'm going to look like such a good daughter. Everybody's going to think I'm so awesome because I'm going to move in with my mom. And so I moved in with her without remembering that my mom and I don't get along. So I moved in with her and things got bad really fast, really, really fast, and like really bad. And when it came to the point where, in the big book it tells us we're going to get to the point, of utter and incomprehensible demoralization or something like that, I wanted to kill myself. And I finally went back to Al-Anon at this point in a state of humility. And I was finally teachable. And finally, I started looking for the instructions on how to work the steps. And I couldn't find them. And this is my own personal experience. I looked and looked in the Al-Anon literature, and I couldn't find tangible, concrete instructions that I could understand to actually work the steps. I could not figure it out. So, meanwhile, again, my compulsive eating problem is getting to the point where it's going to kill me. We're talking about binging and purging and restricting and that kind of thing. So I was driven back to my other fellowship, and in so doing, I stumbled across the big book. And I couldn't believe it. I started reading it and I was like, oh my God, there are actual instructions in this book on how to take the steps. I couldn't believe it. So I reached out for a sponsor. I grabbed the first person that responded to my plea for a sponsor for my food fellowship a sponsor in that fellowship, and God moment, it turned out that she was a dual sponsor in both that fellowship and in Al-Anon, and she wanted to sponsor me in both. So she took me through the steps in both programs at the same time, through the steps out of the big book, and on the other side of the steps here, all that awkwardness, self-pity, resentment, anxiety, jumping into relationships like a maniac, self-serving behavior, all the mental illness stuff, all the train wreck stuff that I've been talking about here tonight, it's pretty much gone. The mental illness stuff, I used to be on buckets of medication for that. Obviously, I'm overstating it, but for emphasis, I used to be on a lot of medication. And I am on hardly any medication now and nothing for anxiety. I used to think it was impossible for me to function without being on anti-anxiety meds. I take absolutely nothing for that anymore. So that problem has been solved by having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. Jumping into relationships like a crazy woman has been solved. Relationship problems, like the most problematic relationship in my life ever was with my mom, and it has improved. Like, I will go with a figure of 85%. Not 100%, but 85% is an absolutely miraculous number because I don't know how many times in the past I decided or I was going to decide to just cut her out of my life and that she was the cause of all my problems and so on. And now I spend time with my mom every single day, voluntarily. And I do a lot of service and I do it gladly. And I love it. I really love it. And I don't do it like you can hear me speaking now. I don't sound like an anxious person, right? Like there's no way I would have been able to speak the way I am right now in the past. My voice would have been shaking. I would have had to write out this long, involved speech, and I would have had to read it off a piece of paper. There's no way I would have been able to just talk the way I've been talking. This spiritual awakening stuff, it's the real deal. It has helped me, you know how I was talking about how kids walk up to each other in the playground and ask, do you want to play with me? I can do that now. I can walk up to a person and just talk to them or just, do you want to go for coffee? Or I can relate to other people like a normal person now. I don't have this massive barrier of self between me and other people anymore. There's a page in the big book on page 62 that says, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. And the first time I read that, and that was way back in 1991, I thought, yes, that is my problem. I had a moment of clarity way back then, and I thought, that's why I don't get along with people. That's why I don't have friends, because I don't think about them. Like I don't think about their point of view and what's going on with them. I only think about me. And this spiritual awakening has turned that around. Now I do think about other people. I'm not saying I'm Mother Teresa or anything like that, and I do nothing but think about other people. I still do my healthy share of thinking about myself, but compared to the way I used to be, it is nothing short of a miracle. It really isn't. Now, in the preamble here, it says, in order to form a habit of depending upon and referring all we do to that power, we must at first apply ourselves with some diligence. That is an understatement. This program is hard work. Okay? And then it says, by often repeating these acts, they become habitual, and the help rendered becomes natural to us. So it's hard work, and you do it every day, and you get into a groove. And the thing you do every day is called steps 10, 11, and 12, and my sponsor taught me how to do them. And in the beginning, wow, they were really hard, and sometimes they're hard now. Step 12 is the easiest for me. Step 11, it's not hard, but I still don't feel good at it. And whenever I don't feel good at something, I have a hard time with it, but I do it anyways, because step 11, prayer and meditation, that's one of those things where the only way to do it wrong is to not do it at all. And step 10s, that's what I use when I screw up, when I get upset at somebody, or because that still happens. You know, again, I'm not completely serene all the time. A step 10 is what I do where I tell my higher power what happened that disturbed me, and, you know, I ask them to remove whatever the character defects were that popped up in me at that moment, and then I go help somebody, you know, to counteract that integral, that selfishness thing that I've got in me. It is what it is. I'm not a bad person. It just so happens that I've got this self thing going on, and thank God there's a solution. And it's just written out beautifully in the big book. You know, the antidote for this self thing is, you know, helping others. Al-Anons tend to have a bit of a twisted view of helping others sometimes. I am kind of not one of those kind of Al-Anons. Like most Al-Anons are the ones that tried to hold the household together and ran around running themselves ragged, doing all the work, and that kind. I wasn't that kind of person. I'm kind of in the minority as far as that goes. On the other side of the steps, I can tend to be like that now. So Al-Anons have a bit of a balance issue, you know, we're a bit black and white, and I certainly am. So that's just one more thing that I need to lean on my higher power for, and it never ends. Like, you know, I'm never going to be all better or perfect or anything like that. It's just going to be a learning experience all along, and whenever things have been going well, the reason for that is when things are going well, I don't feel all that inclined or have the need to lean on my higher power, who is God, all that much, because things are going well. So then when something, you know, happens that's not very great, I believe it's God saying, come to me. You know, like, you haven't been spending much time with me lately. You know, you need to come to me. So that's when I reconnect with him more or better than I have been, and our relationship grows. And that's just the way it's been going. And God willing, it'll keep, you know, going that way, and my connection with God will keep keep growing because it's a beautiful thing. I'm so incredibly grateful. Oh my God. Never thought I would be out of that resentment, self-pity, anxiety mode. So I think I used up all that time. So I'm going to scroll down here to our closing. Seventh tradition, every group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. This group does not have a payment structure in place and currently has no overhead expenses. If you would like to fulfill Tradition 7, please direct contributions directly to Al-Anon World Service by visiting alanon.org. For questions about this meeting, or if you are looking for a sponsor, please send emails to alanonbigbookrecovery@gmail.com. Recordings can be accessed on YouTube if you're in the YouTube app by searching at Al-Anon Step Speaker in the YouTube search box. If you're interested in other Al-Anon meetings that follow the Big Book, please visit AlanonBigBookSolutionGroup.org. That's AlanonBigBookSolutionGroup.org. And I'm going to read from page 164 in the Big Book. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order, but you obviously cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right and great events will come to pass for you and for countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Now let's have a moment of silence for the Al-Anon who still suffers, followed by the Lord's Prayer, or a prayer of your own choosing said in silence. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.